All right, so today we're going to be talking about factory design pattern. Hopefully you feel somewhat comfortable with factory. You've had some experience with it so far. The question on your midterm was about factory, specifically dynamic subclass binding. We talked about it a little bit in our midterm review, but now we're going to go a little bit more in depth and provide you with some more examples as to what factory pattern is and why you would want to use it. But first, we want to start off with a dad joke because we're going to try and keep things as normal as possible. So, why did the integer drown? That's my drum roll. Because he couldn't float. Ha ha. Hopefully that made you smile at least a little bit. And hopefully by the end of this video series, we'll be able to finish off all the dad jokes that Nikhil and I had prepared. But let's go ahead and get started with what factory actually is and what the point of using factory design pattern is. So factory prevents the direct instantiation of an object or an instance of a class. So the whole idea is that you're able to control when your object is created and how your object is created by not being able to use the new keyword to create an object. So let's give you an example. Let's say that this is an object that we have the ability to create. So there's a person interface, which a KMP impl class extends. So we can create a KMP object. Awesome, right? But with this, we can create as many KMP objects as we actually want, which at a certain point doesn't really make that much sense, right? There's only one KMP that we have, so we should only have the ability to create one KMP. So we need a different way of creating these objects in order for them to actually make sense and to work for the software that we're building. So the first type of factory that we're going to talk about is singleton. So singleton means you can only create one instance of a particular class for your system. So we only have one instance of KMP possible. And this is probably the most general type of factory pattern that you're going to see and adheres to the basic factory pattern rules. So let's show an example of how we actually can create a singleton. So as you can see, we have a KMP impl class. It implements the person interface. It has a constructor, which is public, and it has one getter method, which returns the job of the KMP object. So one of the first steps in making this into a singleton design pattern is making the constructor private. This is what's going to actually prevent the direct instantiation because we won't be able to access the constructor, and thus the new keyword is not going to be able to work. So by making the constructor private, the only thing that can access that constructor is the class itself. So now that we've made the constructor private and we have prevented direct instantiation, we still need a way to retrieve our object. And the way that we do retrieval is with our public static factory method. So at the bottom, you can see we added in a public static method called getKMP that returns to us an instance of the class. So basically, what you can see is the method checks to see if our instance KMP equals null. If it equals null, which means it hasn't been created yet, it doesn't exist, we create the one instance of our object. Otherwise, we just return the instance that has been created. And you can see that we use the private static variable at the top to help ensure that we can figure out whether KMP actually exists or not. So if that private static variable is null, we know to create our only instance of KMP. Otherwise, we return the KMP that already exists. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense and is a good example to show you how to actually create a singleton. Multiton is a generalization of the singleton. KMP has some examples in his slides about how to create a multiton. Basically, it allows for controlled creation of multiple instances. So normally you'll use a map We're not going to go super in-depth on what a multi-tin is in this video, but if you are interested in checking out multi-tin, I highly suggest going through KMP's Lecture 15 slides and looking at his direct example of how to create a multi-tin. We're going to stick on singleton and dynamic subclass binding though. All right, so dynamic subclass binding is useful whenever you need to decide what type of subclass to choose. If this looks familiar to you, it's because it's the type of factory that was on your midterm. So hopefully you had some type of idea as to what you might want to do for that instance, even if you weren't 100% sure that dynamic subclass binding was what you were using. So if I wanted to choose which professor I wanted to pick, and I had this factory class inside my comp sci professor class, I have this factory method called getProfessor. Again, as you can see, it's public static. I use this class number parameter to decide which professor I want to create. So if my class number is 110, I want to create a Chris Jordan object. If it's 401, I want to create a KMP object, and so on. So this is an example of the first part of dynamic subclass binding, which is the factory method decides which subclass is actually created. So the factory method has all of the parameters and all of the information needed to decide which subclass will be created. And your subclasses, as you can see in this example, to decide, if we had this KMP subclass, we made the constructor protected. This way, we're still preventing direct instantiation. However, we have our parent class that's still able to create this subclass object. So we use a protected modifier to ensure that our parent class can still use and still create an object, but we're preventing direct instantiation from the outside. If you're still confused, I highly recommend these few resources. Number one, check over your midterm and watch the Zoom lecture, which was April 2nd, where KMP went over the solution. He walked through and talked to how he would have created the dynamic subclass binding solution for your midterm, so I highly recommend going over that. We have some FRQs on Sakai. There is a factory FRQ, so if you want to go ahead and try doing that, feel free to. And then Piazza or Sakai, if you have any questions about anything that was covered in this video, feel free to post on Piazza or message me on Sakai, and we'll do our best to answer them as fast as we can. If you do have any other questions, please reach out to us. We're here to help you. If you did get through this whole video, I do want you to answer a secret special word for one of the questions on the Sakai quiz. So on the Sakai quiz, the final question is, did you watch the video? If you watched the video, answer shoebox. Shoebox. And that's going to be my indication to know how many people are actually watching the full video. So thank you so much, and hopefully this was helpful for you.